Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today at this webinar about meaningful funeral and memorial services. My name is Rosalie Gouwenhoven. I'm a London-based celebrant, Death Cafe host and co-facilitator of a Grief Foundation's training. And it's my privilege to create and conduct inclusive ceremonies for people of all backgrounds, abilities and beliefs. And in this webinar, I'd like to show you a few examples of how people have created meaningful funeral and memorial services, both before and during the pandemic. This presentation is not so much about what I call the hardware of a funeral, such as the hearse and the coffin, although I'm sure you all will have very beautiful and powerful examples of this. It's more about the ritual acts of funeral and memorial ceremony. So the creative, personalised and unique ways in which people have expressed their grief and love. Everything I'll be sharing in the next half an hour is based on ceremonies that really happened, and I'm very grateful to the families who have given their permission to share their stories and the photos. Photo copyrights are all my own unless specified differently. And if you'd like to share any insights on social media, please credit me using @rituals_today. I'll be showing that on the slides as well shortly. I'll be doing a Q&A after my presentation, so the last 5 to 10 minutes we'll have the opportunity to answer some questions, and I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. So please pop your questions in the Q&A. Thank you. So I'll now try to get up my slides. Here we go. So we've got some. So I hope you all can see this okay. So this is me conducting a ceremony at Sacred Stones Willow Row Borough in Cambridgeshire a few years ago. It's a beautiful example of a funeral at an alternative location where the family wanted to honour the person's life and his interests in an intimate setting. And I'd like to invite you to take a moment to look at this photo. How does it make you feel? Is it different from the funeral you've been to? And what makes it different? Just think about those answers for a while, just for yourself. A brief overview of what I'll be covering today. So welcome introduction, that's where we are at the moment. Then I will briefly explain why I do, what drives me in my work. Then I'll present a few examples of how people have created meaningful funeral and memorial services. And also explain how COVID-19, the pandemic, has affected funeral services. I'll end the presentations by giving you a bit of insight of how I work and also give you some advice on what to consider when planning your own funeral or arranging a funeral for someone else. And the last 5 to 10 minutes are for Q&A. So first of all, why I'm doing what I'm doing. These photos were taken at my dad's funeral. My father died on the 30th of October 2006, filled 14 years ago today. So his death is one of the reasons why I do what I do. And I think it's so special that I'm doing this presentation today. So I'm dedicating this presentation to him, his memory. Unexpectedly, but it did not mean that he was not prepared. He had written a script for his funeral and he had some very specific ideas for the day. He wanted his funeral to take place in the theatre space of the university where he worked. He was a minister, but he didn't want a religious funeral or efficient. He had allocated roles to each of his children and my mother. So you can see one of my brothers playing the piano here, my other brother played the drums, one of my sisters played the violin, and we presented an artwork of my other sister, which you can see on the right-hand photo. So my father asked my mum to read a poem, and my role was to lead the ceremony. Instead of a coffin spray, we handpicked flowers from the garden. We carried the coffin ourselves and also lowered it ourselves into the grave. My dad's funeral was one of the most difficult days of my life, but also one of the most life-affirming, and it would change my view on death and funerals forever. So what has my dad taught me through his funeral. So a few things. First of all, death is part of life. It is here. We can push it away, pretend it won't happen. We can use euphemisms and shy away from planning our ending. But it's a fact that if we live, we die. So we better embrace death as part of our lives. Think about our wishes and share them with the ones we hold dear. I later realised that my father's funeral script was one of the greatest gifts he'd ever given to me in his life. Thirdly, there are no rules. You can have a funeral wherever you want and do whatever you think is right. You can do it yourself. We had a funeral director, but his role was more guiding and advising us than taking the lead and directing us and telling us what to do. Organising a funeral for a loved one is a painful, heart-wrenching thing to do, but it does not mean it's grim and gloomy. My father taught me that a funeral can be a beautiful, positive, and life-affirming event. Knowing that we did what my father wanted, doing most of the organisation ourselves and having an active role on the day of the funeral has helped me in my grieving process. Being able to do something at a time where all control seems to be lost gave us comfort. And this is why I do what I do. I believe funerals can be life-affirming events that when people are being inspired, guided and supported, that it can be a place of creative expression where we learn and practice how to live with death. So a few thoughts about what, in my view, a funeral is and why we do funerals. In my experience and views, a funeral is an important ritual in making the transformation from a life with a person to a life without that person. It's an event that makes the death real. It creates a space to express thoughts and feelings that comes with a loss. It honours a life lived and celebrates this life. It brings people together in grief and love. It creates a community. And lastly, a funeral helps find steps in continuing the relationship with the person who has died. And I also believe that there's so much opportunity for positive change in the way we do funerals. So here are a few thoughts, and feel free to add your own to this, to these stars for 10. So first of all, giving ownership to the people involved, guiding them instead of directing the family. So just help to understand what they need, and as a funeral professional, help them make that a reality rather than sell them any products or tell them how things are supposed to be done at funeral services. Look for alternative locations. A funeral doesn't have to take place at a crematorium if that's not the right place. Creative contemporary rituals that reflect a myriad of values and beliefs. Many of us are not religious, or they have got a mix of faith or beliefs, and they're quite sure, or they're non-religious. I think it's important to value all those different beliefs and the way people deal with life and death and their person, and acknowledge that and bring that together. Including people of all ages and abilities. Make sure that children are being involved. I've been working with people living with dementia where the family thought, let's not bring mum to the funeral because she won't understand. Whereas I believe that if you work with people and their abilities, that we can offer opportunities involved. And then other opportunities, adding beauty and style to the event. So in this presentation, I will show examples of creative expressions and how people have found beauty and style and inclusivity and creative ways to say their farewells and celebrate a life. So we'll start with this one. It's a funeral for a young man, and he loved fantasy and science fiction films. And when I met his parents to talk about ideas for their son's funeral, I refer to a scene in the film Guardians of the Galaxy, where characters decorate the coffin of their dead friend with candles, objects, and ribbons. And inspired by this, we created a ribbon ritual. So the colourful ribbons you see here on the coffin represented the diversity and inclusivity of the meetings their son has had with people from all over the world during his life. Every one attended the funeral was invited to choose one ribbon and place this over the coffin. Then everyone cut off a piece of the ribbon for their choice to keep, a symbol of letting go and holding on. When we committed the coffin, we all did the greeting of the guardians. I don't know if you know how it goes, but it's placing your fist, right fist, on your heart like that. And it's a gesture the family still does to honour this beautiful young man. The second example is impression of Sonia's funeral. Sonia was an artist and performer who lit up the world with her art, her warmth, her humour and her love. And it felt right to do a performance during the ceremony as a tribute to Sonia's artistic gifts to the world. So people were invited all to walk up to the coffin, pay a final respect and gather for a song. The song "I'm Gonna Lift My Sister Up" by Fire Rose Touré was taught on the spot by a dear friend. And the lyrics were just so powerful. I'm gonna lift my sister up, she's not heavy. And if I can't lift her up, I will fall down. So together we lifted her up with our singing and we held hands while we committed Sonia's body to be cremated. This example is of a baby funeral in a local woodlands area. So as the parents had really special memories of the woods, walking here with their son, both during pregnancy and during the 6 weeks of his life. As the family lived abroad and many of their friends hadn't met their son, they created a garland of photos in the trees. And if you look carefully, you can see them hanging just in the backdrop. They used personal objects, including a handmade quilt by one of the grandmothers, to personalise the space. During the ceremony, people were invited to collect a leaf, a twig, a flower, or any other keepsake from the woods. We put all these in a basket and sent them with the baby, who was cremated after a private farewell ritual at a local crematorium. This is an impression of Emmy's funeral and memorial service, and both were inspired by her love of quilts. She was a talented quilt maker. At her private funeral, her husband and dear friend draped one of her quilts over the coffin at the start of the service. A few months later, a memorial service was held in her memory for a larger group of family and friends. Emmy's ashes arrived on a Harley Davidson, the ride she'd always dreamt of. People decorated a cherry blossom tree, a reminder of her Asian background, with personal messages and memories. A selection of Emmy's quilts were exhibited for everyone to see. One special quilt was auctioned during the ceremony to raise money for the PSP Association, a charity that supports people like Emmy who are living with PSP and CBD, diseases of the brain. So these examples all give an impression of how we can make funerals and memorial services meaningful. Other examples of what you can do are choosing music or readings, a song that reminds of someone, a favourite track, a favourite piece of poetry, and it doesn't have to be funeral poetry. You can read a passage from a favourite book, for example. Flowers, herbs, many flowers, herbs have a symbolic meaning that are relevant for a funeral or a celebration. Rosemary, for example, is well known for its reference to remembrance, and peonies stand for a happy life. Colours and scents. People can be paying their tribute by wearing a particular favourite colour. And why not use scent to use another one of our senses? For example, for his partner's funeral, John sprayed the order of service in a favourite perfume. Then there's objects reflecting the person. At the funeral for a musician, you can see that here on the slide, people received a backstage pass when they entered the chapel. One side showed a photo of the person, and the other side a line from a favourite song by Bob Dylan. It not only put a smile to people's faces, but also was a wonderful keepsake to cherish. Then you can do a commemorative act, and we've seen some examples in the previous slides. And of course, you can personalise a funeral by choosing a nice coffin or having a shroud, have a particular hearse in a particular colour or style. And you can use photos to personalise your funeral memorial services and create a beautiful order of service. So these are a few ways how we can create meaning at funeral memorial services. Now I'd like to move on to how funeral ceremonies during COVID-19 happened, because a lot has changed. There were a lot of restrictions have been in place since March. Fewer people can attend funeral services in person. No touches are allowed, no hugs, which is really heartbreaking. And although I've seen it's been really, really difficult over the last couple of months to be working with families who couldn't have the funeral they wanted. But also I've seen so much resilience, so much flexibility and creativity with working with the opportunities that were out there. And honestly, technology has been a lifesaver. It's not the same to witness a funeral online, but it has given opportunity to come together from all over the world, to be either present in thought and spirit and watch a ceremony through a live stream or a webcast, or organise a Zoom and an online funeral for people to come together, share their stories and memories, light a candle and sing a song together. And people have always been very creative in how to include those people who can attend in person. So a webcast is one example, but we've also lit candles, if that was allowed for people who couldn't attend, or placed a flower on a chair just to represent someone. People have written tributes that we read out on their behalf, or they sent voice recordings and video recordings that we could play during the service. So all examples of innovative and creative ways in which people worked with the opportunities that were available and made sure that they could say their farewells and honour a life in the best way possible. A few examples of these in the following slides. This is Patricia's garden. She could not attend her son's funeral service, but she wanted to do something at the same time of that service. So respecting government guidelines, she invited a small group of people for a ceremony in her garden. We shared tributes and knees, played live music, and at a time of committal, so when the coffin at the crematorium was being committed, we read a special poem and observed a few moments of silence. And neighbours witnessed the ceremony from rooftops and through fences, which was very special as well, and they commented how beautiful it was. This is an example of children who couldn't attend a funeral service, but they made some drawings and the funeral director placed them on top of the coffin and a little chocolate heart as well. And we see here some candles that we lit for people who couldn't attend a funeral service in person. So technology, as already said, has offered enhanced and new possibilities to bring people together. So here's a screenshot of a webcast where Greek people are watching the service online just to make sure that they feel included as well. And the other photos are of online memorial service, a safe way for people from all over the world to come together. And the good thing about an online ceremony is that you can actually include many of the elements that you would do at an in-person service too. So, for example, at Marie's memorial service, we started the ceremony with a slideshow. We lit a candle for her life. Family and friends read out tributes. Someone had written a poem for the occasion. People wore their favourite colour, which was red. And at the end of the ceremony, we raised a glass to her life. So, just a snapshot and a few examples of ceremonies and memorial services that I've conducted. A few brief notes on how I work. So I always start with the person's story and the people who are arranging the funeral. Who was this person? What captured their essence? Who are the people arranging the funeral? What are their values, their beliefs? What did the person believe? And then also work with circumstances and context, because every death is different. So the circumstance in how someone has died will inform how we will design the ceremony, but also family dynamics and context, like people who can or cannot attend a service, are really important to understand. Then bringing all the ideas to personalise the service, the ideas that I just highlighted and mentioned, together in a coherent structure, the ceremony design. Then I write a script, I share that with the family, and together we work on something that feels right and fitting for them. And then obviously we need to think through the practicalities and logistics, and that requires teamwork with the funeral director, the venue staff, and any other people involved to make sure that we really know how we're going to do it on the day. And of course, we need to observe these days restrictions as well to make sure that we're aware of what we can and cannot do. So for you, if you are planning a funeral, either thinking of your own funeral or planning a funeral for someone dear to you, just a few things. Take your time. There is no rush. Take the time that you need to find out what's right for you, to find the time that's right, the venue is right, the celebrant is right, the funeral director is right. You can only do this once. So explore the options, shop around, and truly stay true to yourself and the person you honour. Don't do anything you don't feel comfortable with, and look for alternative option. A good funeral professional like a director or celebrant will help you find creative ways in doing what you would like to do. Also be kind to yourself. A funeral doesn't have to be perfect. There are other ways that you could commemorate your person after the funeral, and perhaps you don't feel the way you feel on the funeral day or memorial service day, and that's absolutely fine too. So just a brief question to you to take away. Has this changed your view on funerals at all? And if yes, how? And has it perhaps inspired you for your own funeral or a funeral you're arranging at the moment? A few useful links and resources. I don't have time to go through them in depth, but if you have, you can watch again, or please email or contact me if you want to have this list, and an invitation to connect further. So please send me an email with any questions, pop me a line, or follow me on social media with hashtag rituals_today. Over to you. So this is an opportunity for you to ask me any questions, perhaps share any experience you may have, and I'll open the chat box to see if there are any questions from your end. So I'll stop screen sharing now and see what we have in the chat box. Thank you. So the first question, are you able to put coverings on a coffin? You are. I mean, of course, during the pandemic, we're not always able to touch the coffin, although the rules vary. So it's always good to check that with funeral director and crematorium. But people have placed draped flags or uni gowns or the quilt, as you saw, on the coffin. So that's absolutely possible. If you want to send it away with the person in the cremator or in the burial or in the ground, if you have a burial, then always check if that's allowed. Thank you for that question. So I work for a charity, and a lot of our support comes from people wanting to donate in memory of loved ones. Collections have been possible during COVID. Support charities. It's usually the collecting of money, and it's via our web link. So people would pass on a web link or a Just Giving page where people can donate money to a charity. There are, of course, different ways in which you can organise an activity. So I've seen people who did before COVID, for example, a concert in memorial of the service, raising money, or you can run a marathon. And during COVID, of course, there are also ways you can do that to raise money for a charity in memory of a person. Next question. We went to a Catholic ceremony. The priest did not let us touch the coffin, but holy water that we would spray on the coffin gloves or handle the jug. So that's, I think, an example of how we can work with, not being able to touch the coffin, but find a way to spray the water, the holy water over the coffin, and gloves to handle the jug. So there are different ways to do that. So it's good that you found a way in that respect. Did you do any training to become a celebrant? Are you humanist, independent? Yes, I'm an independent celebrant, and yes, I did do training. I was trained as a minister in one of my previous lives, so that taught me a lot about ritual and the psychology, philosophy, history of rituals from across the globe, and I did an advanced celebrant training here in the UK. So not with the British Humanist Association, but with an independent organisation. Yeah, Kerry, I will, perhaps you can email me. I'm not quite sure if I can put it back because we don't have much time, and there may be too many anyway to capture those. But feel free to contact me or Good Grief Festival, and they will be able to pass them on to you. People are asking for your email address. Yeah, I'll type it here. So Rosalie, at ritualstoday.co.uk. So I hope you can see that all right. Yeah, add it to your event page, Kerry. Thank you. I hope you can read that. Okay, so we've got a few more minutes for any questions you may have or any comments you'd like to make. You mentioned like candles representing those who can't be there. Is it always possible? Yeah, no, it's not always possible. So if I forgot to tell that, always check with the crematorium, burial site, or any venue that you use. It's indeed, some are very, very, very sensitive. So usually it's small, lighter, small tea lights that we use. How long do you tend to spend with the funeral? Yeah, that depends, of course, on the complexity of the situation and what they want. So I would say a funeral where people have their ideas and it's not too complicated, it's around 10 to 12 hours, but it can also be a couple of days when things are really, really complicated and there's a lot of specific ritual design involved. Do you have any advice on dealing with funeral planning for babies and children? Yeah, lots of advice. It's of course really, really, babies and children are so difficult because you don't expect that to happen, so you're not prepared at all. I think going back to what I said on my slide, by take your time and please do what feels right for you. Create as many memories as you can during the time with your child. And at the baby funeral, it's always finding that the way to for people to acknowledge that they know that's their child and always be their child. Sometimes they include a naming ceremony to acknowledge the name of that child, and that will always be carry that name. Lots of questions are coming through. Choose not to undertake is how the coffin's transported. There are specific companies that do coffin transport only. So you can hire those. Carriage Masters is the official name. How you understand the idea of having an ongoing relationship. Yeah, so that's more like how people live on in the thoughts and memories, if you just phrase that in a non-religious way. So it could be that specific dish reminds you of that person, so you can cook that dish and think of them. You can create a little altar with a photo, some specific special objects that reminds them of them. You can write letters. There's many things you can do to continue the relationship with the person who has died. Yes, my email address. Where did you train me? Oh, that was in the Netherlands. I'm from the Netherlands, and I trained at the Free University in Amsterdam. The most unique location you've done a funeral, like in the photo. Yes, if you've seen, I think a couple of locations were quite unique. I really love the one in the woods. I love it when a location where it's surrounded with nature. And I think nature's got such a healing power and so much, yeah, it just appeals to all the senses, which I think is a really important thing when dealing with grief and funerals. So yeah, I think an outdoor location is amongst my favourites. Great. Thank you.